We're not doing boy, girl, boy, girl.
Well, good afternoon. This has been a wonderful day of conversation and a lot of great ideas. And we wanted to take the time for this panel to really discuss what it takes for leading change in the industry. And as you all have heard, there is a lot of ideas, there's a lot of concepts that have been put in place, there's a lot of opportunity that exists, but yet there is a real understanding that the change itself has been slow to happen. I'm going to look at Henry and MaryAnne first. You both have worked on projects recently that have been very innovative, have led forward. Would you talk a little bit about what it took at Delta, what it took, MaryAnne, with some of your projects, especially the Innovation Center, to really bring that innovation forward? Was it just a given, or was there a bit of a challenge to get there? Henry, I'll start with you.
Sure. I was going to say ladies first, but
okay.
I'll go ahead and take a stab
Not today.
at it. Innovation is very key, and everyone in the room is probably laughing and saying, why do you have an aviation guy that's an airline at a construction and build conference? Actually, Delta's we have one of the largest construction projects going on throughout the country. We're sitting at about $15 billion in construction projects at several airports around the country. What we learned, there's two things that we had to do to get better. If you don't know, we filed bankruptcy in 2005. We learned that we had to better manage cost and manage projects. So internally, we created a corporate real estate division within the airline and said we cannot let projects run over, and let's really control our future. And number two, we really over-indexed in the millennial population. One thing that we learned that's critical as we go forward, a little math here, there's 51 million millennials in our country. And there's 53. There's 51 million Gen X personnel, which is me, or individuals. And there's 41 million baby boomers. So what we said, as we design and build airports and also create a better airline, we have to over-index with this population in terms of their thought processes and their analytical skills, and they're really innovative. And those are just a couple of things, not to take a lot of time, that really helped us to think forwardly, because we had to index with the group that's going to run the world, right? And that's the millennial population, and they're very good at technology. And lastly, our industry, when it comes to building, we really have to focus on the building industry. We've been building things for over 100 years. We've been building them well and great, but we're losing a lot of talent, and we're not harnessing talent. They're going to the tech sector because people think the tech sector is sexy, it's fun, it's great, it's really robust towards inflation, and it's pretty robust. And we really run our business in terms of construction, design, build. If the economy's good, right? Running a good GDP, you can build things. So that's just a few things that we looked at, but really focusing on people and just really getting into technology and innovation.
And it's something.
And I'm sorry, that was kind of long, but.
No, that's good, because I think we need to come back to that, to really the discussion around how talent changes, how we need to think about how we lead the organizations differently. But MaryAnne, let me ask you, if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us some of your experience and what it's taken to have innovation present in the projects that you've led.
Sure. So I'm a ground-up real estate developer and operator, and I'd say that in a place like New York, it's probably the last frontier of disruption in the innovation economy. I mean, we're still building buildings the way our great-great-great-grandfathers built buildings. And so to try to build anything great or anything ambitious in this town is extraordinarily difficult. The building we're sitting in, the New York Times building, was, for me, an important point in my career, because we wanted to build a beautiful building, a masterpiece of the modern millennial, designed to meet the most exacting needs of the world's top-tier tenants. And interestingly enough, it turns out that buildings in New York are not easily built ground-up office buildings. The average age of an office building in Manhattan is 69 years old. And so to do it is very, very challenging. And to do something iconic is ever more challenging. And so to build across from the Port Authority on 8th Avenue at a time when no one believed that rents could ever be at the levels necessary to justify new construction, we hired a great architect, and we stuck with a determination to build a highly transparent masterpiece, which we think this building is, with all of its openness and light and air. But it was built through 9/11 and financed as one of the first buildings to rise after the events. And to the New York Times' credit, they stood beside us and said that nobody would want to live and operate in a building that was designed to withstand the attacks, and that they were going to go ahead and keep with the design of this building, which again was highly transparent and open. It's not a selfish building, it's really open to the entire city. You can walk through the lobby. And so this is the first time that I realized that it's important for us to build in a way that reflects the great city we live in and not build commoditized buildings. And so I left the public company, Forest City, that I worked at for 23 years, founded a company run by a woman with my two partners. And the goal of the company is to build buildings by people who look like the city we build for. And while that seems like a very basic concept, it's a club, and it's a group of people that really operate in this industry where there is not diversity, there's not equity, and there's not inclusion. And so I'm trying to do that in my little piece of the world. As part of my tenure at Forest City, though, I did have an ability to work with Bruce Ratner, who is one of the great innovators in the industry. And if you can dare to think it, he'll let you chase it. And as long as you could justify it, you had a good shot at doing it. And so we built the tallest modular building in the world at the time, next to Barclays Center. And it was a very hairy, complicated, and expensive process. And really what we said is that the buildings need to get built. It's process innovation. It's basically taking the building, building it off-site, so every floor is built on the ground floor in a modular capacity. And there's so much repetition in a residential building that we knew it was possible. But we got the New York City Building Department to sign on to the code, saying that this building would be built by New York City Building Code, but 65% of it would be built in a factory. And if you can imagine disruption in construction, which if you try to drive around New York City or at the airport, you know what it's like to navigate around construction projects. Imagine 65% of that process is taken off-site. And these mods were traveling down Flatbush Avenue and being put together almost like a Lego system. And this building stands today and represents, in some ways, the future of construction, which is that you can have a process that is highly efficient happening off-site instead of the parade of trades, which you all know about, in a building up and down that makes it not only inefficient, but highly costly. And so I was proud to be part of what was a $10 million experiment just to get the IP to a place where we could go to a factory and start building. And so today it's called full stack modular. The city is finally onto this idea that for the affordable housing crisis, this is how affordable housing ought to be built. And so again, it's been so slow and so painful. This process of building this single building took a decade, involved multi-million-dollar litigation, and lots of naysayers. And so I would say it was a Rorschach for people in our industry that knew how to think outside the box. If you understood what we were trying to do, you had an elevated level of thinking in the business, because we can't do things the way we've been doing them. And so I'm very proud of the fact that we built this modular building in Brooklyn, and I think it really is a sign of how things ought to happen in the future.
Thank you for both those explanations. It's interesting how we have to have that willingness to be the first mover, to take those steps and really try to see how we can move things differently. The challenge is, though, that they do take long. And as we were talking about before, you have to have the staying power. So Hen, let me ask you to come into the conversation. You work with a number of clients, you work with industry, you work in the C-suite. What has been the thinking around how the industry changes? What has been the thinking and the drivers that will really bring the industry forward?
Yeah, so I'll come to it from a little bit of a broader perspective, because I work across industries, not particularly just with the construction industry. But of course, we've seen across all sectors, there's a huge amount of disruption and innovation from various sources. And I think where the challenge comes in is technology is just the first part of it. But what it really takes to embrace kind of the new world we live in is business model innovation, is changing how the organization think and work. So the ways of working, the culture, and all those things that are much softer and more difficult to change, especially in traditional sectors where people grew kind of used to do things in a certain way. Technology sort of forces you to forget all of it and kind of rebuild yourself from scratch. So those are consistent challenges that we're seeing in many sectors. One of the ways we try to attack it is by developing an index that looks at innovation from an analytical perspective. We call it Vitality, and we actually did a project with Toronto and Tomasetti to kind of help look at the organization in various levels, including the people, the technology, the structure, the strategy, how you think about strategy, And that allows the organization to have a more analytical and measurable way to assess where they stand vis-a-vis innovation and how innovative they are. So there are some ideas that we are working with and implement across a broad range of industries.
So taking tools to understand where innovation is playing a role and how effective you are.
Right, so the idea is that there are predictable drivers of innovation, and we studied it across a broad range of companies, and by identifying those drivers, you can now go and say, how do you stack against those various drivers? And if you know what levers you need to pull, you can get a better outcome. So that's kind of the broad idea.
Right, right. Henry, it looks like you have a comment here.
You know, they're saying some things that are fantastic. When MaryAnne was talking about building off-site, one thing that hits my mind when you look at whether you're building a building, where you're building an airport or you're building an airplane, the first thing that should come to your mind is safety, right? If you can build off-site, you're building it in a controlled environment, and what you're doing is you're replicating process. You're leaning out the waste, and you're building something that's structurally safe. And as Hen said as well, so it kind of caught me what he was talking about. When you really start looking at processes and how do you get new thinking, I think that's the first thing that we really got to think about is new thinking, and MaryAnne said it as well, as diversity. Once you get to a point of having diverse ideas and diverse people, you start to conquer challenges and you start to break down barriers, because whatever you're building, it should look like the people that live in the community, right? Whatever you're designing, it should look like the people in the community, because that's where some of the best ideas come from. And lastly, on this point, what we did at Delta, we actually partnered with Georgia Tech, where we had headquartered in Atlanta, and we had them design an innovation lab. And I'm not a techie, but they're very smart at Georgia Tech. So throughout the organization, whatever ideas that we have, whether building an airport, whether building a new engine shop, whether designing the screens that you see on board our airplanes that we used to source from a third-party vendor, and cost overrun,